Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm re-reviewing Linkin Park's One More Light. When it comes to re-reviewing albums, typically I don't think it's a bad thing to do. However, most of the time I like to think that re-reviewing albums typically needs to have a purpose, and most notably being, a kind of change in opinion of some sort. If, I feel a certain way about an album in my initial review, I'm not going to do a re-review of it, a year later just to kind of say the exact same thing I said the first time around. And, typically for something like this to happen, a re-review, you would need to be a change of opinion that typically takes time to really acquire. On the other hand, here I am today re-reviewing One More Light less than a year after it was initially released and my initial review went up. So, well, what's the deal here, to be completely honest? Well, if you've been following my channel, I've been reviewing all of Linkin Park's albums here leading up to this review. And you can check out those reviews in a playlist I have linked in the description below and on screen here at the end of the video. You can click on that. It'll also take you to the playlist. And also in that playlist, aside from my reviews that I've done, there's a discussion video where I talk about changing opinions in music and how that relates to this album here. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about that here and now because I do have a whole video about that which I recommend you check out. But essentially what I was talking about in that video was that, different events and context and perspective can change with time due to different events and things of that sort. In this case, kind of being the death of Chester Bennington, the lead singer of Linkin Park, or one of the two lead singers of Linkin Park. If you're unfamiliar, in this past July, he unfortunately killed himself, and, it was just something that definitely did have an impact on me and many other people. And kind of going back to this album, given that it had just only recently been released, meaning that he was, of course, involved in this album's process, probably while dealing with whatever depression and other things that he was going through while making this album. It's important to kind of maybe recontextualize the way that we kind of look at this album, and definitely going back to this album, I do view it in a different way than I did initially. However, that's not to say that I've had a complete 180 on this album. I'm not saying initially I didn't like this album at all, really, to be honest. As of now, my initial review is still up. I'm not sure if it will still be in the future, but if you go back to that review, yeah, I didn't really like this album. I gave it, I believe, like a 2.5 out of 10. So, that's not particularly good, but here I am. I haven't exactly completely changed my mind. It's not like I'm giving it like a 10 out of 10 now. That's not true at all, to be honest. Just keep watching, you'll see what I mean. But, there definitely are some things here that I kind of view differently than I initially did back in May when I initially reviewed this album here. For starters, most importantly, the lyrics for the most part. That's really the thing that I kind of look at differently, because the instrumentation, that really hasn't changed all that much. But the way you look at the lyrics here is very different. The first track on the album is called Nobody Can Save Me, for crying out loud. If that doesn't kind of scream something to you, I really don't know what to tell you. The thing is about this album, One More Light, in the context of Linkin Park's entire career, this is easily the most poppy album that they've released so far, kind of abandoning the rock elements entirely of their band and moving it in more of a EDM type direction, I would say, with many aspects that are really prevalent in modern pop music present here on this album today. Kind of like how Recharge was kind of taking the dubstep craze of the time and incorporating into that album. I kind of feel like this album incorporates the modern sort of EDM scene into this album here. The only difference between this album and Recharged, however, is Recharged was a remix album, so it was kind of easy for people to brush aside and say, well, I didn't really like this project, but it was just a remix album. And then they gave us The Hunting Party, which is probably their heaviest album in years. So, looking at Recharged in hindsight, it was really just kind of an experiment and one that was easily kind of, just on the side. It was something that you could easily ignore if you didn't like it. However, given that this is a studio album of new content, it's really difficult to ignore, especially because, of course, that means Linkin Park is going to be playing these songs live, or they were going to be playing these songs live, that is. And, it was just going to be another important chapter in the band's career. And if you didn't like it, well, that can kind of be a big problem if you're a fan of this band. The EDM influences I'm speaking of are most notable on tracks that oftentimes have drops in them instead of choruses, or, kind of combining the two together. A lack of guitars really in the forefront here. Just a lot of synths present throughout this album, and Linkin Park are no strangers to electronic elements. Aside from Recharge that I mentioned earlier, several of their previous albums have incorporated a good amount of electronic elements, like 1,000 Suns and Living Things, for example. But here, it just completely dominates, and the guitars that were always present on those albums as well kind of seem to take a backseat to the electronic elements here. The vocals here on the album are kind of typical for Linkin Park, consisting of, Chester singing, Mike singing, and rapping. However, another problem I kind of have with this album is the fact that Mike just isn't really rapping on a lot of these tracks here. The only track where he really does a lot, in my opinion, is Good Goodbye, which also features other artists rapping as well, so he's not even, the only one here. Lots of this album, I think, is mostly just Chester singing, because Mike does get a few tracks where he's also singing, but for the most part, I feel like it's Chester. And that's kind of a problem that I also had with Minutes to Midnight, but here I feel like it's even more so a problem because they just don't even incorporate mixing their vocals into these songs in an interesting way. Because even back on that album, at times they'd still, I guess you could say, incorporate different things for these songs that were, maybe had Mike on them or so. But here it's just Chester will sing a song, Mike sings a song, really. The only song where I think that they really kind of mix it up is Good Goodbye, where they kind of have both of them together, as well as the guest featured artist I mentioned before. And, that's kind of an unfortunate thing, because I do like how Linkin Park, how, they have multiple vocalists and vocal styles that they use, and here they don't really take advantage of that on this album for the most part, which is kind of disappointing, but what you get here in terms of the vocals aren't exactly bad either, so it's not something to really complain about, in my opinion, for the most part. But the thing is about this album is just that, in many aspects, it does kind of feel like it is taking a lot of influence from what's popular right now, and I'm not exactly sure how well it's going to pan out in the future for this album in terms of looking back on it. I just have a feeling this album is going to seem really dated in not more than a couple of years after this sound that's really popular right now passes. Sort of this EDM sort of trap influenced sound, which is really kind of present here in many of the instrumentals on this project. I'm not saying it's completely exactly the same as a lot of the songs that could be played on the radio, but in many regards that is true. I mean, I did hear Heavy a significant amount of times on the radio kind of leading up to the release of this album, and that's Linkin Park. While they have had radio play before, Heavy definitely fits into the description of being radio friendly more so than any other song Linkin Park has really released before in the past, and the same could be said with a lot of songs here as well. And then another aspect I really don't like about this album is just the chipmunk vocals that are kind of thrown in there as well. I know they're commonly used, or I'm not sure if commonly is the word I'm looking for, but frequently used in electronic music, and you might know what I'm talking about when I say chipmunk vocals. I just don't like this really any time that it's used, chipmunk vocals. And it doesn't have anything to do with the fact that it's this album in particular. It's just, in general, I don't like chipmunk vocals, really. There's a rare chance that I think it could be used correctly. Most of the time, I just find it really annoying. And whenever it pops up here, it just doesn't really mix well with anything here on this album. And now, the electronic elements present here as well, other electronic elements that is, are oftentimes incorporated in a decent manner, I guess you could say. They don't particularly stand out though as being super creative or anything like that. Now, the very poppy sound of the album, typically radio type music isn't exactly super experimental or out there or anything like that, and that's kind of what's the same for this album here. It's not always implemented badly per se, it's just not implemented in a way that's super interesting either. However, you do get some moments that do really stand out as not being particularly good, most notably the chipmunk vocal moments I mentioned earlier, and then the track Sorry for Now, which is easily the worst Linkin Park song that I have heard, to be honest. And I'm kind of disappointed to say that because lyrically I don't think the song is all that bad, and Mike's vocals aren't bad either. It's just the drop on this track is just so obnoxious, honestly. It just comes almost out of nowhere, and even for this album and what it's been doing so far in terms of drops and electronic elements, it just takes it to a whole nother level and just doesn't really even fit with this track or this album all that well in general. It's just very obnoxious and, just doesn't sit well in my opinion. Even the more redeemable aspects of this track, like the vocals and lyrics that I mentioned before, can't compensate for this obnoxious drop that really just makes me want to skip over the track whenever I listen to it. Just for the record though, I think that's the only track here on the album that I really can't stand listening to. The other tracks all range from, in my opinion, decent to, just, kind of there, to be honest. And that's what really the rest of the worst tracks here on this album kind of are. Just there, like Invisible, for example, which really doesn't stand out to me in any particular way. However, there are some tracks here that I do enjoy. Take, for example, the two tracks that we get right at the end here, One More Light and Sharp Edges. One More Light, of course, was originally written for a member of, I believe, Linkin Park's label, someone or someone that they knew, and talking about their death. And so then, of course, after the death of Chris Cornell, a vocalist for Soundgarden, who was good friends with Chester Bennington, they performed the song live, and that was just kind of a whole new meaning for the track. I highly recommend you look up the live performance that was dedicated to Chris Cornell, because that was a really awesome performance in my opinion, and just a really creepy one as well. Just the fact that Chester can't even finish like the end of the song, it's really haunting and almost creepy in a sense, given the context now. And I do recommend you check that out after leaving this video. But even, of course, even now after Chester's death himself, many fans are kind of applying the song to him as well. And I do like the lyrics here on the track, talking about just death, what's the significance of it in the grand scheme of things. And the instrumental here, it's very kind of stripped back, but still somewhat electronic leaning, I guess you could say. It's not really obnoxious in your face with like drops or anything like that. It is more stripped back and just kind of basic, giving you the lyrics and the vocals primarily the focus on here, which is the main focus of this song, I feel. Just the vocals and the lyrics, with the instrumental just kind of being back there to kind of help carry it all the way through. It's honestly a song that I didn't pay much attention to the first time I reviewed the album, and just didn't really stand out to me all that much. But given some stuff in the recent months that have transpired, the death of Cornell and Bennington, as well as just, you know, seeing the live performance of the song, the track has really grown on me a lot, and it stands out as being the easy, like, standout track here on the album. Then the closing track, Sharp Edges, is another emotional, like type track. It's a nice way to close out the album. I do like how on this track we get to hear some actual, like, guitars in the forefront here. And for the record, I'm not saying that there aren't other moments on the record where you can hear guitars per se. It's just that a lot of the times they're kind of pushed to the back compared to the synths. But here on Sharp Edges, they're very much in the front. And it is, like, nice sounding, I guess you could say. Chester's lyrics here, once again, kind of have a bit of a lyrical punch to them, and his vocals sound nice here. And it's a very nice way to close out the album, in a bit of a bittersweet way, I feel, to kind of close off just this album, this part of Linkin Park's career, because honestly, we don't know exactly what's going to happen in the future with this band, at least as of when I'm recording this right now. There are some other tracks I enjoy on this album, however, besides from those last two, which I think are the more standout tracks. The opening track, Nobody Can Save Me, that I referenced earlier, is another one I do find myself enjoying, except for really the chipmunk vocal parts that pop up in the song. Those are the only thing I really don't enjoy. The rest of the song I do enjoy. I like Chester's lyrics here and his vocal performance. Of course, Nobody Can Save Me. Nowadays, the lyrics here are just really creepy and almost like, I mean, his death now, you really can't look at the song any other way at this point, knowing what he was probably going through when he was writing a lot of the lyrics here for this album. It's rather creepy. And the electronic elements, I think, are incorporated in a bit of a better way here on this track. They don't sound super unnatural. And the thing is, throughout this album, Linkin Park, they could do a more electronic sound, I feel. They could do this more popular electronic sound, and I think they could pull it off well if they wanted to. Chester has the vocals to do it. Mike has the vocals to do it. Hip-hop, vocals, rapping works well with this style of music that many artists have shown over the years. The thing is, I just don't think Linkin Park take full advantage of this on the album itself, in my opinion. What they go for a lot of the time here are just kind of generic sounding drops or electronic parts that even sound cheap at times with just the sound that they're creating. I don't feel like they were able to fully go into this genre of music and, you know, do their own thing with it, which is kind of what Linkin Park have done over the years, go into different genres and do their own thing with these genres for the most part. But here on this album, I do feel like they're going for a new genre, but they don't really explore it enough, or, you know, kind of make it their own enough to really kind of stand out. And that's why it feels a lot like it's something that could fit on the radio or something like that. It just doesn't have enough of a personality of its own, is what I really kind of feel here. And there are some tracks here that do kind of have that feel to them. Maybe even like Nobody Could Save Me, for example, or the two closing tracks that I feel like were really good. But then again, for every one of those, you also have another track that's also just kind of or isn't good altogether. Looking at you, sorry for now. But some other tracks here, in my opinions on them, Good Goodbye, I think is, you know, a decent song. The chipmunk vocals are the only part that really I don't like here. I like how we get to see Mike rapping here, and he's doing a good job. The guest features from Pusha T and Stormy's, once again, kind of like I said in my initial review, I am a fan of Pusha T's work, but I'm not really super familiar with Stormy's. But they both do a good job here on this track. Once again, Pusha T, when is the new album coming out? That's all I really want to know. But, you know, aside from that, Chester's vocals here are also fine. I just don't think that the electronic elements are super well incorporated here on this track. It once again feels a bit generic. The chipmunk vocals, once again, not exactly my thing. You have tracks like Battle Symphony, which I think is just a pretty decent sort of electronic pop song. It's not super standout, but it is enjoyable for what it is, to be honest. The track Heavy that features Kiara, the initial single that was released from this album, and the track that I did like a 17-minute rant on, which is, as of now, I believe still up on my channel if you want to check that out, though I'm not exactly sure if I stand by what I said in that now. You might as well just go on what I'm going to be saying here. So this track in particular, I still am not the biggest fan of this track. Of course, the lyrics do kind of I can look at them differently now, knowing what we know now. But the thing is, I still don't think that they were the best written and just delivered. Like, the verses just feel a bit awkward here on this track, and I'm not sure why. Maybe it's just the way that they delivered the lines, but it still doesn't. It still just feels a bit awkward in my opinion. Kiara's guest feature, once again, I still think it's kind of just odd overall because she is a newer artist, really not anywhere like related to Linkin Park. The only reason I think that she was on the album was because she was a big fan of the band, and I guess they just wanted her on for that reason. And her vocals are nice in my opinion. They're not super standout, but they are like decent. It's just still, once again, a kind of odd feature, but overall the track just isn't really super memorable in my opinion, and it does have a bit of an awkward feel to it at times. And the thing is about this album as well, another aspect, is while Linkin Park really kind of toned back the aggression in terms of the instrumentals, there are some vocal moments here that I still feel like have aggression to them, like on Talking to Myself or Halfway Right, where Chester feels a bit angry, and his vocal delivery, well, it's never quite at the same level as he was on some of their earlier works, or even like The Hunting Party, for example. I still feel like these tracks would have fared a bit better had they had a bit more of an aggressive instrumentation to be over, to be honest. Not exactly the super heavy guitars necessarily, but just a bit more guitars I think would have helped with the aggressive feel of these tracks. Like Talking to Myself or Chester, he just feels a bit more too aggressive for the electronic sound that he's kind of like singing over, to be honest. It just seems a bit awkward there as well. I think guitars would have really helped out there, and it would have, I don't think it would have necessarily detracted from the album's flow as a whole. If they had just kind of, built up the guitars a bit more on this track and maybe like Halfway Right, like I mentioned before. Overall, coming back to this album now with a different perspective and a different way to look at it, I can definitely say that my opinion on it has changed. Not like a complete 180 from my original opinion, but my opinion on the album has improved slightly. However, some of my initial gripes with the album are in fact still here. Just the fact that I don't think the electronic sound is implemented and explored as well as I think it possibly could. I know Linkin Park are better at this, and they have explored electronics in a more interesting way before in the past. I just don't think that the vocal, sharing the vocals between Mike and Chester was done in a nice, even sort of way. It was definitely more Chester heavy, I feel. And Mike, especially just in terms of rapping, he doesn't do a ton of it here on the album. The features on the album are okay, to be honest, and there are some of the more electronic moments that do become a bit obnoxious. Once again, looking at you, sorry for now, but there are some redeemable moments here on the album, some lyrical moments that I think definitely do stand out and kind of have that Linkin Park feel to them that is just very typical for this band. Tracks like One More Light, Sharp Edges, Nobody Can Save Me, even like Talking to Myself, for example, which I also enjoyed the lyrics on. The thing is about One More Light, it's not like the worst thing ever. It's not not even sure if it's a bad album. I think it's definitely more close to average in my opinion, because while it does have some redeemable moments to it, even some great tracks like One More Light, the thing is, the weak parts of this album, the chipmunk vocals, the more cheap-sounding electronic elements thrown in there at times that don't really take full advantage of what I think Linkin Park are capable of, and just, a more pop-friendly sound that I don't think really explores as much as it should. I just think those moments kind of drag down this album and make it just kind of underwhelming, to be honest, especially coming off albums like The Hunting Party, for example, which I think was a very consistent album. But here, this album just feels a bit underwhelming in the grand scheme of things. And while I do like a lot of the lyrics present here, and I do like getting to see maybe a softer side of the band as well, it just doesn't exactly get panned out to the best degree that I think they were capable of doing. So overall, I have to say that between my last review and this one, my opinion on this album has improved. However, once again, I would say that this album is probably closer to average than it is good or bad, and definitely it is better than what I initially thought of the project. However, I still don't think it compares to any other album or studio album rather, that Linkin Park have really released before. It's probably still my least favorite studio album from them, but there are some redeemable moments here. And once again, tracks like One More Light and Sharp Edges, even some of the other more electronic heavy tracks, I do possibly see myself coming back to in the future, especially One More Light. I'm definitely coming back to that track in the future, just putting that out there now. So overall, what do I really have to say about this album, for the most part, in the grand scheme of things now, at the end of my Linkin Park discography review? Well, pretty much, once again, decent album, but, not anything super special or terrible in my opinion. I think a lot of the hate that comes at this album was definitely as a result of just the change in sound from the band. And once again, some of those elements I mentioned before, the electronic elements that didn't sound super, interesting for the most part, were definitely reasons why. But then again, it's unfortunate that it kind of took the death of Chester to maybe make some people look twice at this album and maybe get to see some of the better moments on the project, like One More Light, Sharp Edges, for example. But yeah, I think it's a decent project overall. I guess I'd have to say it's closest to average. I would have to say more so than good and bad. I know I've been saying that a lot, but I'm just trying to kind of stress that all the way through. So yeah, I think that's really my opinion for this project, at least as of now. Maybe it could change again in the future. I don't know, but to be quite honest, I'm not sure if I want to review it a third time. So yeah, that kind of concludes my Linkin Park discography review. Yep. Comment down below your thoughts on this album. Did it particularly change with time? And once again, I definitely do stress that you guys do check out that video I made with changing opinions, which is in the Linkin Park playlist linked in the description and will be on screen here at the end of the video. Follow me on all the social medias in the description. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more music-related content. And stay golden, guys!